everyone. Welcome to the Thecoinrepublic's Money and Me podcast. I am Varuni, your host, and today I have with me a really interesting guest. I have Chrissy Hill. She is the Chief Legal Officer and Interim COO of Parity Technologies, but that's not it. She started her career as a legal associate at Linklaters, and she also served as a director of compliance at Barclays, and then chief operating officer and general counsel at Tony Blair Institute. With over 20 years of experience and exposure across both global legal and regulatory landscape, Chrissy has been in both the blockchain as well as the TradFi space, if I'm not wrong. Chrissy, we have a lot to unpack here, and I would love to hear all of that from your own self. Welcome to the Thecoinrepublic's podcast, and please tell us a little bit about your illustrious 2-decade career.
Well, that is a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here to share insights and my journey, however it might, resonate with people. So you hit upon all the highlights already. I actually like to say I've worked for 4 great British names, Linklaters, Barclays, Mr. Blair, the former UK Prime Minister, and then Dr. Gavin Wood now, in Web3. And I think the golden thread throughout my career, because I will obviously say that on the face of things, those 4 names don't necessarily go together, right?
Absolutely.
But the golden thread throughout my career has been finding the frontier of law and regulation.
Right.
And striking out, trying new things. So I left law school, left DC, left the States, and came to Linklaters. And then loved being in private practice, but knew I wanted to do something a little bit more practical, hands-on. And that's what led me to compliance in 2006, which was actually pre-financial crisis.
Right.
So post-financial crisis, obviously, compliance is a much different profession. But then it was new, and it was advisory, sitting with investment bankers. And no one would want the financial crisis to happen, but it did.
Yes.
And while at Barclays Capital, Lehman was acquired. So that was, again, a new era. And then in 2013, I had the opportunity to go work for Sir Tony Blair after he left office. And he was the first UK Prime Minister to set up both consulting and charitable institutions in order to pursue different areas of his interest. And I went to be head of legal and compliance and then COO and GC for those entities. And again, a prime minister hadn't done that before. So I was navigating new things and providing advice. And that was the first time I actually heard about blockchain, because there was a technology for development policy unit within Mr. Blair's Institute. And in 2021, they were writing papers about how blockchain technology can help governance in developing nations around the world. And I was going to take some time off. I decided after almost a decade it was time to take a break. And 2 weeks into my 6 months off, I got a call from a friend who was like, "Oh my gosh, have you heard about this Web3 stuff?" Yeah. And I was like, "Well, yeah, I know about blockchain." He was like, No, let me introduce you to these amazing people at Parity, and you need to learn about Polkadot. And that's how I got into it. Wow. Yeah, and I was looking for that frontier. I was looking for something exciting, not boring, and I would say be careful what you wish for, because it has been anything but boring.
Absolutely. I'm sure it's not been boring and rather challenging to be in this space. How has it been working alongside Dr. Gavin Wood at Polkadot, and how has your experience in the traditional finance space working with Sir Tony shaped your experiences here at Parity?
So, it's such an honor and a privilege to be working with such amazing minds and real pioneers across all my different jobs that I've had throughout my life. And of course, Dr. Gavin Wood is no exception. I mean, just a phenomenal mind. And with such a view for the future, I think that's what I have enjoyed from working with Mr. Blair, working in traditional finance with Barclays and Linklaters, and also working with Gav, is they're real visionaries and with a really clear mission. Of course, the missions were different, but it's very inspiring, and I think means that we all raise our game in order to realize those visions. And so I think certainly my background in traditional finance helps me understand some of the economics underlying, and like importance of budgets and business and, tokenomics and things like that. But ultimately, it's the inspiring missions and delivering Web3 that really keeps me coming back every day.
Absolutely. You bring together compliance, regulation. You've worked obviously with these visionaries. How do you think such visionaries and leaders of the state can come together to make this space at large more transparent? I feel in the Web3 space, transparency is still something that a lot of entrepreneurs sort of struggle with. How have you ensured that at Polkadot and Parity?
So we have a very, very active community within Polkadot. And in June, there was a Treasury report that was published about how basically the Treasury had been spent for the first half of 2024. And there was a lot of noise about that report because, of course, when you really lift the hood and you look at how money is being spent, there will always be opinions about how the money should be spent, right? And so it's not anything that was hidden. It's all publicly available information. It was compiled into a report and shared with the community to say, right, this is how we've spent our money for the first half of this year. Do y'all agree with this? And of course, there are bits of it that people didn't agree with, but we feel like sunlight is the best disinfectant. And I don't think you will find any other protocol that discloses all of its marketing spend, which was particularly controversial, and all of how the Treasury is being used in the same way. So empowering the community to have that safety and the conviction to not only publish that report for Polkadot, but it was publicly available and everybody saw it. And it got a lot of comments back. And actually we find other protocols now demanding the same for their treasuries. There will always be refinements that need to be made in terms of how you spend. And there are hard questions that have to be asked and answered. But if you don't shed that light on things, then you'll never have the ability to make changes. So that's what we're doing within Polkadot to promote transparency.
Now, governance as well remains to be a core theme of decentralization. How have you guys ensured that you give equal importance to decentralization as well as inclusivity when talking about governance at large?
Well, I mean, we could talk for hours on this, and it's also. I actually just spoke at Polkadot Decoded on Monday about decentralization and governance and how it's a spectrum, and how there's a lot of different metrics to use in order to decide whether a protocol is centralized, partially decentralized, mostly decentralized, or truly decentralized, which is actually Latham & Watkins, a law firm, put out a matrix lately. And if your audiences have not seen that matrix, it's worthwhile looking at because it also has a category not only related to governance, but also to computation, development, value accrual, and then usage. And within each of those categories, there are about, 4 to 8 questions and topics there that they show you how decentralized you truly are as a protocol. It's an amazing resource. And governance is one where Polkadot does score highly. We're the world's largest DAO. We also have OpenGov governance system, which replaced our Gov1 in June of last year. So it's just celebrated its 1-year birthday. And it really does give power to the community to exercise their right to vote based upon their token holdings. There's also something called voting with conviction, which can lock up your tokens for longer but give you greater voting power. Also, Web3 Foundation, which is the issuer of our native token DOT, delegated about $42 million worth of voting power to a group of individuals called Decentralized Voices. And so it's, again, as a whale, they were saying, we're going to give some of that voting power to the community so everyone can really have a say and feel empowered. So there are also, other bits and bobs within OpenGov that I think promote that community voice. And again, that focus on governance from a decentralization perspective is something that we take very seriously, especially from a regulatory perspective.
Interesting. It's often said that technology grows a lot faster than regulation can, and regulators often play catch up with technology. Working in a space like the blockchain space or Web3, how do you manage to keep up innovation for firms while not compromising on compliance or regulation?
You ask the hard-hitting questions, don't you?
We had to get to it.
Yes, exactly. We had to get to it. So my job within Parity is obviously to focus on the compliance and regulatory elements that impact an engineering-first company. So Parity is where most of the developers sit who build Polkadot and maintain, keep it going, right? Keep refining it. And so it is not, for instance, Parity is not doing anything with RWAs. And it might, not in the same way as, say, a project that is actually involved in that particular arena. Of course, it's the blockchain infrastructure that's being used by that project that Parity builds. So it's a slightly different perspective, because of course developer liability is one of the things that we're thinking about. We've got the recent Tornado Cash case and Telegram. There's all kinds of things going on in that. And also a lot on the IP side, copy left, copyright, all that. But because I have been active in the regulatory space for a while now, I do give courses as part of our Polkadot Blockchain Academy in the past, courses to founders about putting in place a legal and compliance plan so that they can build their budgets in order to determine what they might need to pay for a license, for instance. But just like I would have a different healthy eating plan because I'm a 5-foot-tall female, of a certain age, certain activity levels. So you have to ask individual questions in order to build a healthy eating plan for yourself. So too do founders need to ask similar questions about their projects in order to determine their legal and compliance plans.
Absolutely. It has to be tailor-made for different projects for different technologies. Now, Parity is, of course, the main technical contributor to Polkadot. In your view, what sets Polkadot apart from all the other projects in terms of governance? You briefly touched upon that, but in terms of decentralization, you spoke about the spectrum. Where does Polkadot fall in that spectrum, and what sets it apart from all the other projects?
So one of the things that I think we take very seriously at Polkadot is the fact that we're not tribalistic. And so if you believe in Polkadot, you believe in a multi-chain world. And we are always trying to reach out to other protocols in order to build those bridges and work together as an industry. I think, one of the things you always hear about when you look at Polkadot is the focus on interoperability. And of course, in May of this year, trustless bridges came into effect, and basically Subwallet, which is a project within Polkadot, was able to enable this trustless bridging with Ethereum, with Bitcoin in a way that had not been done before. It's quite groundbreaking. So, and we can get into ERC20s and all of that, but yeah, I won't go into the technical details. But I think that focus on interoperability, also scalability, also security, and then the focus on not being tribalistic are some of the key points that distinguish Polkadot.
Right. Now, you've worked at various sectors in various geographies, of course. How has that shaped your experience, and what have been some of the key challenges and learnings from your experience, especially transitioning from Web 2 to Web 3?
I certainly felt the transition, especially in January 2022. The learning curve was steep, very steep, especially because, as an industry, we like to use acronyms, and so it was quite an adjustment. I think also it was something I enjoyed because I was very curious about what everyone was talking about, but the learning curve was steep. Then it was quite short from a legal and compliance perspective, actually, because there wasn't a lot written on the books anywhere, really. And in the last 2.5 years, there's a lot more information to digest from the legal and compliance perspective and the operational perspective. And it's happening daily, hourly. So it's very challenging sometimes to keep up with that 24/7, 365-day a week. Yeah, everybody deals with it.
It never sleeps anywhere.
Exactly, and that is one of the things I would say was very different, because when I was in financial services, timing is dictated by the markets opening and closing, right? With Mr. Blair, for instance, we were at the end, when I joined, it was 25 people in about 7 countries. When I left, it was over 500 people in over 30 countries. Now, of course, that was challenging, and I think that prepared me for Web3 in a lot of ways, because I was managing lots of different jurisdictions. And so I took some of those learnings from that traditional space in the Institute into Web3 in order to try to keep up with things. But the pace was nothing like it is, like what we see on the tech side, obviously. So we all do the best we can do, rely on wonderful podcasts and individuals such as yourself who educate, and, that is absolutely essential, the job that you do, because it provides people that snapshot of what's happening on the ground in the moment in a really insightful way. So thank you for what you do in that space.
Well, thank you to people like you who are willing to educate and who are willing to come on podcasts like ours and willing to talk about all the amazing things that are happening, and also the dangerous things that are happening. You mentioned about how 2.5 years back, there wasn't as much paperwork, there wasn't as much information around regulations or compliance, even for entrepreneurs. Now, of course, we're a few steps ahead, but we're still a lot behind in terms of how far the technology itself is. How do you see the regulatory landscape globally sort of evolving as the technology does? And do you think regulators will be able to play catch up fast enough?
Oh, I think that there is, again, a spectrum of regulatory preparedness, interest, and also willingness to understand and get involved. And I think you see those jurisdictions who have looked to provide certainty. So even if the tax rate is 30%, right, which might be high, you can build it into your business plan again, right? You have that certainty. That attracts innovation, because you might not like that number, but hey, you can plan for it. When you have so many years of uncertainty, and I'll use the US as an example, then it drives innovation away, because you can't plan, you can't anticipate, and with so much enforcement, that's a huge legal bill. And it, especially for the tiny founders, we call them tinkerers, right? We want to support them, and it's something that I think is very important from all kinds of perspectives, whether it's the financial side or the innovation side or national security, for instance, because you want innovation to stay. So jurisdictions where certainty has been provided and continues to be provided, I think, are the ones who will be ahead of the game. And, you know, MiCA in the EU is a great example, Japan, Korea, you know, also jurisdictions like Dubai, attracting investment, wanting to promote it, sandboxes like in Hong Kong that have been created. You know, all of these things are attracting innovation. And I think those jurisdictions are very smart to do that.
How's Polkadot keeping itself ahead of compliance and regulation? And there's not a lot of, let's say, controversy that we've seen around Polkadot with Parity Labs, of course. How have you guys sort of kept yourself a step ahead of regulations? And do you have any key pieces of advice for tinkers, the tiny founders that we're talking about, in terms of how they can regulate around, how they can navigate around this regulatory maze that we have?
Yes, certainly can be choppy waters, and very opaque. So I think for the tinkerers of the world, again, finding those individuals, whether they're in LinkedIn or X, or it's a podcast, or it's a journalist who have their finger on the pulse in your jurisdiction, and following developments, that's key. Or getting a good advisor who can help you and spending a little bit of money on that. Also becoming members of trade associations. That can really, it amplifies your voice. It's important for the industry. So I think that is something that the tinkerers of the world should really be focused on, and also Parity. Also the Web3 Foundation, which is the issuer of our native token DOT. And when you do have trade associations and you do have that bigger voice, or as individual companies with a voice, I would always encourage engagement with the regulators, right? Because many of them don't necessarily understand the technology, and some of that is our own fault because it can be intimidating and opaque when everybody's like GM and, you know, IRL and HODL, yeah, exactly, and build spelled the wrong way, and they're like, what is going on? Why can't you people spell, right? And that sounds crazy, but it is.
It's
like
a little difficult for them to take us seriously with all of this.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So, and also because many people are intimidated by technology, I think that engaging, educating in a positive way, combining your voice with other members of the industry, and caring and saying this is important, and we take it seriously, and we want to be regulated by good regulation. Just that dialogue builds trust on both sides.
Absolutely. So definitely dialogue and discourse is something to go forward with, and of course more discourse and dialogue with regulators, and not being scared of them, rather working together with them. I always say that less competition and more collaboration is what should be the tagline for Web3. Do you have any closing words as we wrap this episode up, Chrissy?
I would say that I have met so many inspiring people in Web3 who have a wonderful vision of what the world can be, that it's here to stay. I always say that I am a mother of a 13 and an 8-year-old, and you know, they spent 2 years of their lives almost on Roblox, like living in London. You know, we were in lockdown for a lot of their young lives, and the only ways that they could interact with their friends was using Roblox, and they're very comfortable with a virtual identity and digital exchange of, like, you know, skins or Robux or anything it might be. And so they're already geared up for the world we're trying to create, and whatever roadblocks are in place that might, you know, hinder innovation or stop that world, I think once that generation comes of age, they're going to be gone. They're going to be swept away because they want it. They're ready for it. And so those of us who are helping pave the way now have a responsibility to them to make sure this digital economy is coming is inclusive, is well thought out, and really fosters innovation.
Absolutely. And on that positive note, we will close this episode with the amazing Chrissy. And thank you so much, Chrissy, for joining us. Those were some really insightful words, and you did put forward a very different, yet the same unique perspective that the Web3 world shares. Thank you so much for joining us on the Coin Republic. It was my pleasure. Thank you.